chief executive. I think given that it's on the front page of just about every newspaper in the world today, the death of Liu Xiaobo. What is your response when you hear Hong Kong people expressing concern about that?
I think Hong Kong people are always very compassionate. And so I share that compassion of many Hong Kong people by sending my condolence to the wife and the family of Mr. Liu.
Do you think he deserves to be in our prayers or people's prayers today?
Let me respond by saying that when we said we should uphold and respect one country, two systems, that means we do want the central authorities to respect the Hong Kong system, and we too should respect the mainland system.
So does that mean that you didn't intervene in recent weeks to express any concern about treatment and whether he should be allowed out of the country or not?
I have said in public that I have confidence that the mainland authorities will deal with this in a legal and compassionate way.
And will you now be asking, perhaps, because you have a position within one country, that perhaps the wife be released from custody, from that she is under house arrest still?
Well, I have said this already, that the central authorities, I have confidence, will deal with this in a legal and compassionate way.
Okay. I mean, because to some people it doesn't feel very compassionate at the moment to be, if you were to ask a lot of people, they might say, I don't see the compassion. I perhaps see the legal, but not the compassion.
Well, how do you strike a balance between legality and compassion? It's not for me, for you to judge.
Okay. All right. Well, moving on to the economy, very different subject, of course. And you were talking just now about trying to make sure that financial services, gets all the help it needs. Housing underlies a lot of the concerns of business as well as Hong Kong residents. What can you do about housing prices, to stop them from continuing to soar away from ordinary people's, possibilities?
Well, this ultimate solution lies in supply. I think Reuters also believe in a free market economy, so it's a matter of supply and demand. So for a city like Hong Kong, which is very cosmopolitan, which is very free, then it's difficult and sometimes it's not helpful to try to control or manage demand too much. So the right approach is to supply. So my government, actually like the previous government, is we will not spare any effort in increasing supply.
But those previous efforts don't seem to have worked. So why would the new set of efforts make a difference, do you think?
Well, I think it's difficult to say that the previous efforts are not working because you don't have a control experiment. Had not because of these measures to control demand and to sort of stifle speculative activities and to increase supply, what will happen to today's property prices? It's very difficult to say. But what my government will do is we will find all means, including some innovative means, to increase supply in land and supply in housing. And of course, to meet the aspirations of our own people in buying, then it needs a bit of innovation in the policy side. So even if you could supply, whether people could buy is another issue. So you need to have the two-pronged approach. One is to increase supply. The other is to adjust the housing policies to ensure that Hong Kong people could afford to buy.
Now, you've outlined a lot of those proposals in the manifesto.
Yes.
How long before they really start to have an impact and you actually can announce decisions?
Well, housing is a bit tricky because even if I have lots of money, just like what I have spent on education, but land could not be created overnight. But the important thing is, of course, to let Hong Kong people to have that sense of hope that in time to come, they will be able to buy. So which means that it goes back to the fundamentals of laying out plans to increase supply and also adjusting the policies to make housing more affordable.
Now, I personally now live in Singapore, and they seem to have fairly successfully stabilized prices. And you're going on a trip to Singapore soon. Is there anything you can learn, do you think, from...
No, I've been a frequent visitor to Singapore in the last 10 years in my 2 official positions as the Secretary for Development as the Chief Secretary. I always envy Singapore in 2 policies that they have rolled out, not recently, but from the day Singapore became a nation. One is, of course, in housing. Instead of going like us in public rental housing, they have put HDB mainly on sale. So people have this ownership, have this assets, and so on and so on. And also in terms of land formation, you just look at how many reclamation that Singapore has done in recent years. The other is the CPF. In our case, we have a very bulky and extensive public rental housing with almost 800,000 units now, but still for rental. And then we have an MPF, which we are still struggling with all sorts of problems.
So even at this late stage, is there anything that you could take away from them and reapply in some way?
It's difficult to sort of start all over again, okay? So what we could do is to build on the fundamentals we have and try to improve. So on the mandatory provident fund, we are looking at lowering the fees. We are looking at e-platform to make it more convenient. We are looking at abolishing this offsetting, which in my view compromises the retirement protection purpose of the mandatory provident fund. On housing, I have said in my manifesto that while we will continue to supply and to build, I will make ownership the main purpose of my policy. So that means that in future, we probably will go for more subsidized housing for sale instead of for rental.
Okay, so that would be a little bit more like the Singapore model in that sense.
Yes, but it's difficult to change wholesale to the Singapore model.
Yeah, and we talk about housing and the efforts to try and get more supply of land and things, but at the end of the day, is the weight of mainland money just going to overwhelm almost any effort? I mean, isn't that one of the key issues here?
Not really, because one is, of course, you have to look at the policy. You have to look at what are the people in Hong Kong who need government assistance in home ownership. And we could adjust the policies to ensure that some of the housing built is restricted to Hong Kong permanent residents. We could devise our own subsidized housing pricing policy to ensure that they could buy.
But there is concerns at some of the land auctions, at the prices that mainland developers have been offering?
No, this is striking the balance because Hong Kong is a free economy. So you could put in certain restrictions, especially for housing commodity, which in my view is not just a normal commercial product. It is a key component in livelihood, and it's also a main contributor to stability. So we are ready to do more on housing because of its uniqueness. But at the same time, we have to be very careful about maintaining Hong Kong's free market economy.
But even on the mainland, in major cities, there's increasing emphasis in land auctions on, you have to use a certain amount of the land for rentals. That there's various ways to make sure that one developer doesn't end up with everything. I mean, could there be other innovative ways that you could keep prices under control?
That's, as I said, that's of striking the balance. We did have that sort of examples previously. For example, the PSPS scheme, that is a private sector participation scheme, where on a piece of government land, we did require the developers to build some of the flats and hand over to us for sale according to our own conditions. That's the possibility.
And so you might introduce more of those kind of programs in mainstream.
I have branded my government with 3 keywords. One is innovative. This government needs to go all the way to find innovative solutions to some of the problems we are facing.
Is it time to scrap the small house policy in the new territories?
Well, right now we have a case in court, so I better not comment too much on that. Whether that small house policy is a traditional right, safeguard under the Basic Law.
Because you tackled that before in a previous position, right?
I tackled that in terms of their unauthorized building structures. I have not gone so far to tackle the policy per se.
the wealth gap generally, what else can you do you think, to try and bridge this increasing divide?
For a capitalist society like Hong Kong, in fact, like London, New York, and with this increased globalization and the application of technology, the change in the nature of jobs, I think it is not very realistic to pledge that we will narrow the gap. But as a government, we have a social responsibility to look after those who are unable to look after themselves. So 60% of this government recurrent budget are already spent on those things: education, welfare, and medical services. And we will continue to do that. So for the latest set of Gini coefficient that we published, if you look at the post-government intervention, actually the situation has not worsened.
Okay.
Has improved slightly.
And the budget surpluses, is there more room for spending those on social policies?
Definitely. That's why I have just mentioned that in my manifesto, I promise a new fiscal philosophy. So I would take a more liberal view on whether we must follow very rigid rules of reining in government expenditure to a certain expenditure level of the GDP, and whether we need to have annual budget surpluses, or whether we could look at a period of time and do more investment type of expenditure.
We had the sale this week of Orient Overseas by one of your predecessors. Did that not underline the problems with Hong Kong port and the shipping industry for you? I mean, how are we going to stop that industry from continuing a sort of slow death almost?
The answer is really to go up the value chain. If you just look at container throughput, then of course we have come down. I think we are either number 5 or number 6 now, below the 20 million TEUs. But there is something called maritime services. London doesn't have a very strong port, but London is a very strong maritime service center. So it is really for us at a strategic level where we want to go in our maritime and port business. I feel very much that we should go up the value chain by going for maritime services in terms of registration, licensing, financing, insurance, and whatnot. But of course, the port also engages a lot of people, so we have to be very careful.
What are you going to do with those people in terms of, do you think there will have to be a massive retraining program?
Well, when the time comes, it will. But at the moment, because our labor force is very, very tight, the unemployment rate is 3.2%. There's almost full employment. And our labor force is aging. Actually, there's a very worrying piece of projection is by next year, 2018, the total labor force in Hong Kong will come down. So with that sort of situation, and if we have surplus labor as a result of retrenchment or change in the business model, then there should be scope for absorbing the surplus labor through retraining. And I'm very happy to spend on retraining because in my view, that is investment as well.
And how are you going to stop like trade finance, insurance, all shipbroking, all those services? I mean, aren't they eventually going to follow the containers to other parts of China and other parts of the world?
No, I don't think so. I think Hong Kong still has relative advantages in our service industry. We have the rule of law. We have an independence of the judiciary. We have this internationalization in doing business with the rest of the world, and so on and so on. I think we are very strong. And that's why in the recent discussions over this Greater Bay Area, many people are very excited. I, too, am very excited about this Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau Greater Bay Area because it's a population of over 60 million. And all those cities, they actually need services to support them. And we can really provide what they need.
So people shouldn't be frightened that Hong Kong is just going to get swallowed up and become another Chinese city within this giant, almost country its size.
Definitely not.
Area.
Unless we ourselves give up. That we don't want anymore, we don't want to compete, we don't want to continue to be successful, then it's difficult to say.
So you were talking about financial services earlier on. There have been some very unpleasant cases of what looks like market manipulation in recent months in the Hong Kong markets. Does that give you pause for concern?
In a way, yes. That's why I just mentioned that in my manifesto, despite the fact that I did not have a very strong background in the financial services, I learned a lot from a lot of people, regulators, market practitioners, and so on. And so I heard a lot, I learned a lot during the electioneering, and that's why I put all those things into my manifesto. I think we need a stronger leadership in the financial sector. We need to bring together our regulators and our market developed practitioners and perhaps lock them in a room and let them find out the way forward for Hong Kong. On one hand, we want regulation to be of world-class standards, maintaining the credibility, confidence in the Hong Kong market. But at the same time, the market should not be stifled. There are new products, new requirements from new enterprises. So how to strike the balance between regulation and development?
I mean, do you think there's not been enough due diligence, perhaps, when there's some of these companies have been brought to market and things? I mean, you shouldn't have 50, 60 stocks falling 90% in a matter of hours, right?
Well, Hong Kong's regulation is really top class, but of course, there are always this sort of things happening. Then we need to keep on to become very vigilant.
And what do you think that would mean in practice? I mean, locking them in a room with a pot of coffee, what do they come out with?
I have a very explicit proposal in a manifesto is to invite the financial secretary to chair a financial leaders forum comprising the regulators from the banking to the securities to the insurance, as well as the market development people, notably the Financial Services Development Council. So, for example, when there are new requirements from enterprises for listing on our market, then we need to find out whether our listing rules are conducive to accommodating that sort of industry or whether we need to change. But in the course of change, how do we maintain the integrity and the robustness of the regulatory regime?
Belt and Road. It seems that everyone is part of Belt and Road.
No, 60-odd countries.
How does Hong Kong get a slice of this in terms of especially the financial services, right?
It still lies in our professional services because we are now 95% plus a service economy. So we should make sure that we have a role to play in the Belt and Road projects in terms of the financial services, the construction services, and other services. So these Belt and Road projects will require a lot of equity to finance. So this is a place you could raise funds. These Belt and Road projects will require very robust risk assessment and risk monitoring in order to ensure that they will go on track. So again, risk management, risk assessment are our strength because we have the talents.
Are the banks signing on to this policy yet, or are they sort of disparate? Because there's obviously other capitals, there's Shanghai, Singapore, other places that will be looking for that business. Is there a cogent plan?
Yes, in my manifesto, and in fact, I have taken it one step further by making a plea to President Xi when I met him that I want very much that Hong Kong could sign a comprehensive agreement with the mainland authorities to give us very explicit position and role, especially in financial services, over the Belt and Road projects, very much like the CIPA that we have signed 14 years ago, the Closer Economic Partnership Arrangement, which allows Hong Kong service providers and products to gain entry into the mainland market. So this time it's the other way around, how we could ride on the Belt and Road to provide our services to the Belt and Road projects, especially those which mainland has a role to play.
And would this be an exclusive agreement with Hong Kong?
No, not sure yet. I'm just putting in my request. We'll have to take it forward with the NRC, the National
Did you get an initial response?
I have to say that during the President's visit to Hong Kong, he has been very supportive of Hong Kong. Yeah.
And Belt and Road in particular, and having a specific niche of that?
I will have to follow up. So I hope I'll be going to Beijing later this month to follow up on the many things I want to do for Hong Kong.
Okay, cool. FinTech, again, another thing that everyone wants a slice of. I mean, I hadn't been to Beijing for a long time, and I went there recently, and no one's paying with cash anymore, it seems. Yeah. So how does Hong Kong catch up with a mainland, almost cashless, leapfrogging financial system?
I have to confess that we need a lot of catching up to do. I just have this experience being repeated to me by an American think tank head who came to Hong Kong, thought that we were already cashless. So he hasn't got any cash, either US dollar or Hong Kong dollar, and find it very difficult to commute. Because even buying an Octopus card needs cash, going into a taxi requires cash, and so on. So it's a lot of catching up for us to do, and we just have published a consultancy study on smart city. So I've told the Secretary for Innovation and Technology, I don't want any more consultancy studies. I want execution. I want an action plan to get all these things implemented. But of course, the poor secretary said, oh, some of the things do not come under my portfolio. They are transport matters, they are treasury matters. I said, that's fine, and I will convene a meeting to make sure everybody is aligned to making Hong Kong a smart city.
But even a simple thing like getting the taxi drivers to accept an Octopus card.
Yeah.
Can you get that done?
Yeah, well, I'm sure we could. I'm sure we could, yeah.
Okay. The President Xi was very blunt in his warning about red lines. Can you perhaps define for us where you think that red line is for Hong Kong?
It's not very fair to describe it as very blunt. I think it's very clear. So it's put things beyond doubt. Clearly, it's really in the one country, two systems principle, the provisions in the basic law, and to protect anything that will affect the sovereignty and the national interests of the country.
So, I mean, but let's say, for example, that someone in Hong Kong writes a book that is critical of Chinese leadership or something, that could be interpreted as crossing the red line.
That happens every day in Hong Kong. That happens every day in Hong Kong. Yeah.
Well, sure, but I mean, you know, and obviously some of the booksellers thing had some relationship to that in many ways. How do you define that? I mean, I'm just trying to wonder, when does that thing that happens every day in Hong Kong go too far?
No, I think we have to have confidence in the one country, two systems. We have to have confidence in the government and the law enforcement agencies. So for our actions in Hong Kong, then we abide by the Hong Kong law. And of course, we all of us safeguard and uphold the core values of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly.
So a small group of people talking about independence for Hong Kong should not be a problem?
Well, it's difficult to say now, because you have to look at what is the legal provision, not only at this point in time, but also into the future.
What about Article 23? Have you been given a timetable by Beijing that they would like to see?
No, but of course the President mentioned this, and I mentioned this in my inaugural speech, that there are certain issues, both legal and political, that we have yet to reach a consensus. On the legal front, it will be the Basic Law 23. On the constitutional front, will be universal suffrage in the selection of a chief executive. Not that we have not tried on both. On both issues, we have tried very hard. On the constitutional development issue, I headed a task force, spent 20 months to try to give people one person, one vote, but did not manage to get that. So on both issues, consensus building is extremely important. But if you imagine if the society that we are now in was still very polarized, very confrontational, then it's very difficult to build consensus. That's why on this timetable issue, I've not been given any timetable, but my own timetable is as soon as possible, as early as possible. We try to bring the two sides together, have some common ground on some easier issues, and then with that, we build up some trust, and then we move on to some of the difficult issues.
So Article 23, would it be possibly a watered-down version of what was tried in 2003, or?
Well, that requires the lawyers to look at, and I don't think it's whether it's a watered-down version, but we need to be clear about people's worries. I just had a meeting with the Journalists Association. I said, you have to tell me, what are your worries over a piece of legislation that is supposed to prohibit acts of treason, secession, which we all agree. that should be done. But so what are your worries? And so we have to address those worries.
And how can you build that consensus? I mean, you said obviously you start with small issues and you try other issues, but it seems like it's going to be very difficult to build a consensus around something that brought 500,000 people out onto the streets in 2003.
Well, one has to remember at around that time there were a lot of things happening in Hong Kong. We have a major financial crisis soon after 1997. We have thousands, if not tens of thousands, of negative equity cases, homeowners very unhappy. And then we have public health issues, we have SARS and so on. Yeah. So, of course, I'm not underestimating the difficulty with Basic Law 23, but I just want us to start afresh, to look at it rationally, because it is indeed our constitutional duty to protect national security.
We hear a lot about Xi Jinping's red line. Where is your red line? I mean, what would upset you enough and think that China had reached one country, two systems?
I don't think the central authorities will want to bridge the one country, two systems, because this is something of national importance. It is something that is unprecedented and unique, that is not only for Hong Kong, it's not only for the 1.3, 1.4 billion people in the mainland China, it is for the international arena to appreciate and understand that this particular formula of one country, two systems has been put in to ensure the prosperity and stability of Hong Kong.
But some of your citizens would argue that people being disappeared across the border for periods of time is a breach of one country, two systems.
Then we have to, when that sort of incidents happen, we means the law enforcement bodies, will try to investigate and try to find evidence. And I also will welcome people who feel that that sort of incidents have happened to themselves. They will come forward to provide the information so that we understand what actually has happened.
Because it does feel that the government is a little impotent about, the situation with the booksellers and then the disappearing Tomorrow Holdings CEO, who, apparently disappeared in the middle of the night, and there was video footage to show it. In a wheelchair. I mean, shouldn't those incidents be more vigorously pursued to try and get a conclusion as to what happened?
Well, I can assure you that my police colleagues are very diligent in dealing with all those cases, but they need cooperation.
From the Chinese authorities?
Well, no, from whoever possesses the information or whoever wants the case to be fully investigated.
And with Xiao Jianhua, I mean, did you yourself or your senior officials look at the video footage, and was it of concern to you?
I'm sure some of my colleagues have looked at it, but for the time being, I just don't feel that major worry and concern, because we just don't know what has happened. We saw something on video. My colleagues saw something on video. We don't know what has happened.
Okay, and his family have not been cooperating in any...
Well, I came back to that same point.
Right.
If people are worried, if people have complaints, then the best way is to trust our law enforcement bodies and our legal system and come forward to tell us what has gone wrong.
So in that case, his family haven't come to you, the authorities, and said,
at this
we
moment
need
in time,
an
I can't
investigation.
disclose anything that is or perhaps under investigation.
Okay. 30 years is a very short time in Chinese history. And so 2047 is almost tomorrow. What will Hong Kong be like in 2047?
The other day, Mr. Tong was asked the same question in a conference that I attended, and he made it very clear, quoting Mr. Deng Xiaoping, if things work well, why would people want to change the system? So I am sure that it is our duty, every one of us, of course, the CE has added duty, is to ensure the success of one country, two systems.
But one country, two systems ends in 2047.
Yeah, but
agreement.
Hong Kong's being an inseparable part of China does not end.
Right, but what does it mean for the current rule of law and all of, lease holding
We are already
contracts
granting land well beyond 2047. If you come to buy a piece of land from us today, we'll give you 50 years from today.
Okay.
Yeah.
But in 2048,
Yeah.
for example, do you think that Hong Kong people would be allowed to mark the Tiananmen events?
I don't have a crystal ball, but if freedom of expression and freedom of assembly are very important attributes of Hong Kong's success under one country, two systems, then I don't see why that should not continue to exist.
So how will your government and subsequent governments ensure that remains?
Well, I have a 5-year term. In my 5 years, I will make sure that, as I have said in my inaugural speech, I will faithfully implement one country, two systems. I will uphold provisions in the basic law. I will defend the rule of law. But at the same time, I will facilitate the development of deep and positive relationship between the Hong Kong SAR and the central authorities.
Okay. A lot is written and talked these days about chemistry between political leaders. Xi, Trump, Merkel, Putin, Trump.
Macron.
What is the chemistry between you and Xi Jinping like?
No, he is the leader. I'm the chief executive of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. To be very honest with you, I met him only 2-3 times.
Okay.
And I feel that he knows a lot about Hong Kong. And when he said that, when on his arrival at the apron, he said that he has some special feelings towards Hong Kong. I do find that to be very genuine. He does have some very special feelings for Hong Kong.
But you haven't spent enough time with him yet to discover that you share an interest in war movies or whatever it is.
Do you know how big our country is? I'm a 7 million people chief executive.
No, I know, but these things are important. These, little the relationships and the sharing of humor and attitudes and everything else. I mean, is there anything that you could point to that you're
No, I have to say this.
unusually
I have to say
aligned?
this. My husband is a very low-key, low-profile person, as many of you know. My husband and I had 2 dinners with President Xi and his wife. I was very touched when, on 2 occasions, Mrs. Xi, the president's wife, said to Mr. Lam, my husband, and thanked him. Come on, why did she have to thank him? Because he is the spouse of the chief executive in this glorious position. But Mrs. Xi thanked my husband for making this sacrifice to allow his wife to take up a very difficult job.
I thought you would tell us that she serenaded him with a song, but perhaps that will be in the future. My final question, and then we'll open it up. At the end of 5 years, how will you measure your success? If there was 1 or 2 litmus tests, what would they be?
Well, I have said in my manifesto some bold vision that I want people to be happy. I want Hong Kong people to be happy and to possess hope. So you may not have a property right now, but you know you can afford one after a period of time, okay? And I want people to be happy, to enjoy Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a wonderful city. So happiness and hope.
Where is Hong Kong on the happiness indexes these days? I haven't checked.
Not very high. Not very high.
Okay.